All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the National Clean Energy Week Policymakers Symposium over one of the more exciting topics that you'll hear about today, and that's permitting. Much of the conversation always revolves around the funding for clean, conventional energy transmission lines, the surface transportation roads, the broadband that we rely on, but oftentimes, which we don't talk about, is the extended times it takes to actually get the permitting approvals to actually put a shovel in the ground. So today we have a distinguished group of panelists to talk about removing obstacles to clean energy and how we get to those 2030 climate goals that the Biden administration talks about as we transition our energy mix away from traditional conventional sources of energy to renewable across multiple sectors. Today we have, before we go through an initial slides, I'm the moderator. My name is Alex Herrgott. I am the president and CEO of the Permitting Institute, a Washington, D.C. nonprofit focused on removing the obstacles that hold projects back while bringing in all stakeholders, including the developer community, the environmental NGOs, tribal organizations, Capitol Hill, states, counties, and the local folks. All of us are required in order to actually build a project. And oftentimes, it is all stakeholders that need to be brought into the process in order to remove the obstacles and to avoid the avoidable delays that oftentimes plague infrastructure development. Today, we have Serge Abergel. He's the CEO of Hydro-Quebec Energy Services. Very happy to have him. Jordan Stone. He's the Assistant Vice President at the American Association of Railroads. We have Jean Grace, the General Counsel of ACP. John Whelan is the Chief Development Officer of Leeward Renewable Energy. And you'll hear from them all briefly, and then we're going to open it up to a couple questions, and then we're going to take some from the audience. But before we do that, I just want to go through a couple slides to set the stage of the environment we're in. As there's discussion of the mansion approach on Capitol Hill on how to speed up permitting, it's important to note that permitting, much like healthcare or the environment, there's no silver bullet. Not one single permitting bill, not one single healthcare bill, not one single economy bill addresses the systemic delays that go back to laws that extend back to more than 100 years. The Rivers and Harbors Act of 1872, or the Antiquities Act of 1925, or Endangered Species Act, or the Clean Water Act of the 1970s that have been thus amended. What we have now is a complicated maze of decision makers spread across 13 federal agencies, in many cases, several states, local and tribal entities, all with the singular purpose of ensuring their responsibility under the very regulations that they're responsible for to protect human health and the environment. The problem, however, is that in developing and building this machine that fuels America, which requires significant modernization of infrastructure, much of which was built in the 50s and 60s, including transmission, surface transportation roads, and much of our energy grid is in desperate need of modernization, the physical platform of our economy. Problem is the overlapping nature of permitting approvals that are required when a project prevails is the exception, not the rule. Permitting takes too long. The jurisdictional maze that it requires an applicant, which oftentimes is either a developer, a state, or a county, must navigate what has often been characterized as a black box. I always say this isn't a Republican or a Democrat issue, it's a process issue. Add on top of that the evolving nature of more than 350 court decisions over the last 24 months that have changed the dynamics of how project developers must adjust in a nimble fashion to change the elements of their project to reflect prevailing decisions at state and federal court. You also have an evolving permitting landscape that includes more than 520 executive actions out of the White House over the last 2 years, and more than 250 regulations that are both in proposed or planned status that change the nature of the rules of the road, which make it very difficult for those putting capital at risk, which currently in active status, we have $1.5 billion worth of clean energy projects, energy storage, onshore, offshore wind, solar, that are actively moving through the process. You can see just through this permitting chart alone that just the decisions to get a simple solar project through here in the 13 federal agencies, the average process is close to 3.5 years for a solar facility over $200 million, and close to 3.5 years when we are discussing Uh, see how I get back to that link here. I'm not sure what I did there. Let's see. Pardon me. Let's see. Well, technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. All right. Back. One of the major issues is, as you can see, this is the Gateway Energy Project, a transmission project out west. You have close to 220 decisions that are made. Not necessarily need to see this image, but it's the idea that projects navigating the maze oftentimes have a tremendous difficulty knowing what requirements that are constantly evolving, so that they don't end up in a situation where their project is experiencing significant pauses and avoidable delays, oftentimes leading to project abandonment. The other issue is in the evolving permitting landscape that I mentioned, that rules that regulate the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, environmental justice, ways in which consultation with tribal entities, all of those are changing with the whims of election cycles. And when the average project life cycle from conception to completion, from the funding, which takes about 2 years on the front end, to about 3 to 4 years on the environmental review process, then you actually have to seek right-of-way and additional final state and local permits, and then the actual building of an offshore wind facility or a transmission line takes about 2 years. And so even in the best case scenario, projects that are funded today likely won't be in utility scale service for 5 to 7 years, even under the best scenario. Here's a short selection of some of the rules that from the Council on Environmental Quality, Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and EPA, all of this which are in a constant state of change and commenting. Even the folks on this panel and myself, who spend most of my life dealing with permitting, are not going to be able to tell you where these rules are going to end up. And imagine putting $2 billion at risk for a project where you're not entirely sure 2 years from now what the rules are going to be on mitigating for a particular species, knowing that your project journey started 3 years ago and perhaps under a different administration in 2 election cycles past. The important thing to keep in mind is that when folks talk about permitting, there's a lot of good ideas. However, what we often miss is the actual hard work of going back deep into these statutes and regulations that have layered on top of each other over the last 30 or 40 years, and figure out in a very apolitical way a way in which to diagnose the problem. There is not a deep state, as many say, within many of these agencies. There is a system that is built to fail, and when a project actually works, it is the exception, not the rule. The key, even with permitting at a pinnacle of national discussion as it relates to what's happening in the U.S. Senate today and tomorrow, is we need to find out what works and what doesn't. And hopefully our panelists today, we will be able to get to a place where we can talk about the actual timelines, what it actually takes to build a project. We can use facts to inform the way in which we move forward. Because at the end of the day, we have no other choice than to work together. We need close to 60 gigawatts, the equivalent of 60 nuclear power plants over the next 30 years to meet the energy demand in this country as we transition away from traditional coal and fossil fuel sources. And currently now, if we built every single renewable project, every single fossil fuel project, every single energy storage project that is currently both in active or in planned status, we'd still be about 20 nuke plants short of what this country is going to need in the next 30, 40 years. So hopefully at the end of this panel, we can discuss how the adults can come together and how we can help inform you and others on what the true state of play is when the hyperbole of both sides, especially in Washington, D.C., gets thrown back and forth. At the end of the day, the true loser when a project is delayed over multiple years is the ratepayer, the user. It is us. So with that, let's move over to Serge, if you want to start.
Sure, Alex. Thanks for the intro, and I absolutely share many of your thoughts. It's clear to us at Hydro-Quebec that we are evolving in a very challenging environment, and we're not nearly as successful as we'd like to be because of time, how long it takes to get to one of these projects, because of the adversity that we have to face once we get into social acceptability issues once we get into the permitting issues, and also because of the confidence in the system once you get your permits, that they will actually stay there and not be removed retroactively. So I'll get to all of that later. Maybe I'll just say a few words about Hydro-Quebec for folks that are not necessarily familiar. So Hydro-Quebec is North America's largest renewable energy producer. It's based in Quebec. It's essentially 61 hydropower generating stations that produce both for 4.5 million Quebec customers, but also for export markets in New England and New York, a total of roughly 40,000 megawatts of renewable power. The thing about our network that's interesting is that it is different in the way that we can store our water in our reservoirs. We have a storage capacity of 170 terawatt hours. Essentially, the consumption of all of New York State, if it stopped raining for 1 year, is in our reservoirs. So it makes us very flexible and very compatible to work with wind and other intermittent resources in order to optimize the transition and make it as less costly and efficient as possible. We're feeling pretty optimistic about future clean energy growth. We have roughly 7,000 megawatts of new production in the pipeline in Quebec for the next 10 years. And when we look across the border, which is the operations I'm responsible for, across the border into New York, into New England, we feel that we can do more. We currently export 36 terawatt hours per year, essentially enough for 3 million households in the US. But we feel that we can do more. We have the capacity to do more, but there's challenges because you need to build more transmission. And this is where we get into this topic that's very relevant for all of us here today. We have two projects that we're looking at right now. One is about to start construction. It's in New York State. It's the Champlain Hudson Power Express. We have our partner, Blackstone. And this is a line that goes from the Quebec border all the way to New York City, bringing enough energy to power roughly 1 million homes in New York City. Of course, this will reduce emissions in the city, but will bring much needed relief in terms of prices right now in that whole area, as you're all aware. The other project, which is essentially the same size, is a project that's destined for the New England market. This is an area where we ran into many issues that are very relevant to this discussion. Permitting issues, timing issues, how long it takes, and the type of adversity that makes us doubt that we will ever get the transition that we need to in order to completely come away from fossil fuel. So I will get into all these details later on and what our real concerns are, but I'll probably just end my introduction in saying, we're optimistic as to things to come. We know the solutions. We know the path forward. There's a way to work together across the border to do more. However, in many areas, we can't get over the obstacles. We can't fix what's broken. And so looking forward to discussing that.
All right. Next up, let's head over to Jordan Stone from the American Association of Railroads.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jordan Stone with the Association of American Railroads. Prior to this, I worked on appropriations in the Senate for the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development subcommittee. AAR is a standard-setting organization that represents all of our nation's Class 1 railroads. People that aren't as familiar, on the West Coast, you have UP and BNSF. On the East Coast, you have CSX and NS, and then kind of running through the center and throughout the country are two railroads, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific, as well as Kansas City Southern. In addition, A also represents passenger railroads and commuter railroads throughout the country. Rail offers a low emission freight transportation option for virtually every industrial, wholesale, retail, and resource-based sector of our economy. It plays a very important role in the domestic supply chains for and manufacturing of energy products, energy equipment, and critical minerals. As a result of that, railroads believe we play an important role in ensuring those industries are more competitive economy. I will also flag that rail is the most environmentally efficient and safest way to move freight over land. We are 3 to 4 times more fuel efficient than trucks on average, and a single train can carry the freight of several hundred trucks at a time. The rail industries are pretty incredible considering the amount that we move. Today, we only account for 1.9% of transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, despite moving about 40% of all distance freight volume. And I will flag as well, railroads believe that we will play an important role in the clean energy future. Rail itself is working actively to decarbonize. We have definitely justifiably earned the title of difficult to decarbonize. A locomotive has incredible power demands on it for very long periods of time. But that we can reduce our emissions kind of with a mix of bio and renewable diesel, as well as batteries and hydrogen. And for us to be able to grow and meet that future, we really do need to have greater predictability and transparency in the federal permitting process, in a way also speeds project delivery without shortchanging any environmental reviews. We'll say, own and maintain their own infrastructure. In the United States alone, it's 140,000 miles away, and we have to be able to meet those kind of maintain those extensive networks to kind of meet future freight transfer demand and continue to provide safe, reliable, and sustainable service. The current federal permitting regime, quite frankly, is overbroad, inefficient, expensive, and has resulted in extensive delays, state roadblocks, and ongoing litigation risk. And we hope to be able to work on that in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordan. Next up for an intro before we get into questions, after if we have a couple more, is Jean Grace, General Counsel at the American Clean Power Association. Thank you, Jean.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. And just for people who don't know, the American Clean Power Association is a national trade association. We represent wind, solar, green hydrogen, transmission, and energy storage, and obviously trying to work to get those resources deployed as quickly as possible. With respect to kind of our focus, one of our big focus recently, and I think it's already been touched upon, is transmission. And I saw somebody wear a shirt a couple years ago, had a picture of a transmission tower on it, and below it, it said, if you like clean energy, or if you love clean energy, you got to at least like transmission. Not necessarily a shirt that a lot of people would wear around, but it does make a good point. And kind of to stress that point, the Inflation Reduction Act, the big bill, the Democratic bill that really is going to drive huge amounts of clean energy over the next 10 years and beyond, is estimated to and projected to realize carbon emission reductions of about 30 to 40%. But those estimates were really kind of modeled assuming that there would be no barriers to kind of clean energy. And transmission deployment is a huge barrier. And a recent report that came out from the Princeton lab, the Zero Lab, estimates that about 80% of those emissions won't be realized unless transmission's expanded at about 2% the time amount it currently is being. So as you can see, transmission's really kind of a huge barrier to unlocking clean energy. One of the big barriers to getting transmission done, if not the biggest, is really the permitting problem. And it really comes down to really two things regarding the permitting of transmission. It's really the environmental review time. A lot of clean energy generation really won't even go onto public lands because they don't want to trigger the environmental review process because it takes so long. As Alex mentioned, it can take around 3 to 4 years. If you're a transmission project, you really don't have a long linear project going across multiple states and invariably going to touch upon public lands and water and are going to trigger federal nexus, and therefore you're going to have to go through an environmental review. And the environmental reviews for transmission are about twice they are for generation. They can take up to about 6 to 8 years. So as you can see, that really slows the deployment numbers down for transmission. The other thing with respect to transmission is there is no federal transmission siting authority. There's a slight provision left over from EPACT Energy Policy Act of 2005, but it really hasn't been effective. It was somewhat reinvigorated by the bipartisan bill in November of last year. That essentially gives FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, backstop siting authority. So if a state doesn't site a line within a year, then FERC can get the authority to do it. However, there's so many hurdles in that process. The Department of Energy has to designate a corridor. The line has to be in one of those corridors. And again, the state has to not act for a year. And then on both sides, FERC and at DOE, you have to do an environmental impact statement. That can take, again, 3 years minimum. So it's really not an effective policy for moving transmission at the levels we need it. The one thing, and we can talk about it more as in the conversation, is there is a permitting bill, as Alex mentioned, being considered today as part of the continuing resolution that would actually give the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission what's called plenary authority to really site transmission lines. And we really think that that's key. Whether or not the bill ultimately stays part of the continuing resolution remains to be seen, and we'll know by the end of today. However, we do think it's an important provision that needs to have more discussion around if it doesn't pass today. And it's something we look forward to continuing the conversation again, because again, transmission is really kind of key to unlocking a clean energy future. So look forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And next, we'll head to John Whelan. He's the Chief Development Officer at Leeward Renewable Energy. Thanks, John.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join today and discuss such an important topic. Alex and the rest of the panelists have done an excellent job outlining the challenges and opportunities we face. Please provide a brief overview of Leeward Renewable Energy and then dive into some of the big topics that we're facing. LRE, as we like to call ourselves, is a high-growth leading developer, owner, operator of renewable assets here in the U.S. We're headquartered in Dallas, Texas, and we own and operate a portfolio of 24 projects totaling approximately 2,500 megawatts across 9 different states, coast to coast. We currently have a pipeline of over 20 gigawatts of wind, solar, and battery energy storage assets in development spread across approximately 100 projects, of which 880 megawatts are currently under construction. We have another 1.5 gigawatts under contract to commence construction shortly. We're poised to play a significant role in helping the U.S. achieve its clean energy objectives. However, without addressing the key issues as we see them, namely interconnection and permitting challenges that we face today, those goals are at risk. They're simply hopes and dreams. One of the topics that most folks don't necessarily see as aligning with permitting. When folks think of permitting, they think of land use entitlements and the like. But electrical interconnection is a critical entitlement to unlocking the developments that we're pursuing. And put simply, the interconnection system is broken. It's outdated, does not meet the energy needs of today, and most certainly doesn't meet the energy needs of tomorrow. There are massive bottlenecks restricting access to the grid and denying customers access to cleaner and cheaper power. Viable renewable energy projects, including our own, are stuck waiting in interconnection queues for 4+ years. We've submitted projects under the pretense, the guidance of RTO, regional transmission operators, independent system operators, that we would have interconnection agreements tendered within 2 years' time. And we're now looking at, as I mentioned, 4+ years, which is simply untenable. These delays not only harm us as the project sponsors, but they harm the communities that we're citing these projects, the power off-takers, the construction workers, and at the end of the day, all of us. These outdated systems require reform, and they require reform as soon as possible. The other challenge that we're all going to be talking about today are the permitting challenges and the constraints and delays we face there. we are facing inconsistent permitting regulations and policies across federal, state, and local jurisdictions, as well as a lack of resources causing an inability to efficiently execute and build these renewable energy projects. We've seen a range of these issues firsthand. Inconsistency between local BLM offices and their approach to competitive leasing. In one case, enabling companies to get together and agree on where they will site their projects and move forward together to permit the projects under one programmatic EIS and separate records of decision. Whereas in other locations, the BLM offices may be hesitant to proceed in this way, thereby throttling or constraining the development opportunities. Additionally, as Alex and others have touched upon at the onset, some of our projects, it's taken 4+ years from the filing of our SF 299s to a record of decision, considerably longer than permitting on private lands. And much of this delay is due to inefficiencies, multiple review levels, and lack of sufficient resources. But it's not just on federal lands where we see these issues. We see these issues on private lands from a state and local perspective. Inconsistent and restrictive ordinances are having a multitude of unintended consequences, including stagnating economic opportunities and hindering a state's and localities' ability to achieve its renewable energy goals. A great example of this is Indiana has taken great strides in creating reasonable model ordinances for large-scale solar and wind development, but there are no incentives for the localities, the counties, to adopt these standards. So it mostly sits on the shelf. Similar to the interconnection issues that I outlined previously, the primary obstacle standing in the way to unlocking the permits for these renewable energy projects is oftentimes a mismatch of incentives and getting those incentives aligned. Many landowners, including farmers, want these projects to diversify their income, but a few opponents in a small community can have an outsized impact that can lead to restrictive solar ordinances, wind ordinances, et cetera, which impinge on landowner property rights and block economic development opportunities for the broader community. The good news is that I believe there are opportunities to take bold action and rethink the permitting processes, the interconnection processes, reduce the complexity and obstacles, and unleash the tidal wave of economic development opportunity and progress towards our clean energy objectives. And I look forward to discussing further with the rest of the panelists.
All right. Thank you so much, John. So up until now, for those that have been watching or that haven't clicked off, we all know that with our significant others and our friends and our colleagues, that we get about 30 seconds to talk about permitting issues before they make us talk about something else. Because it might be one of the most boring, most important issues that nobody wants to discuss. And so up until now, this seems like a very typical permitting here discussion, but we're about to take it up a notch because I want to level set. You've heard a lot of technical discussion of projects, and it sounds pretty bleak, but just to level set, it's important to keep in mind a couple things. 99% of all infrastructure in this country is entirely funded by the private sector, entirely funded, even on roads and bridges, or not owned by the federal government, perhaps. So the states and locals end up raising local excise taxes to pay to make the local match on federal gas taxes. Wind and solar, although might receive additional siting money from IRA or from the IIJA bill that was passed last year, that makes a small difference at the margins on taking a project from red to green. Take into account that although many folks talk about gas taxes when they're talking about infrastructure, the average family of four pays about $200 a year in the 18.4 cents a gallon in gasoline. However, and added water and electricity rates are anywhere between $1,500 to $2,500 across the country. Yet oftentimes the infrastructure needed to turn on our light or to drive our car, especially as electric vehicles become far more prevalent as we deploy public and private charging stations, is that no one wants or realizes the true cost of what it takes to build that infrastructure. However, when it is built, there's user cost and inconveniences. Confession is good for the soul. As a staffer in the Senate for the last 20 years, working originally on energy bills in 2005 and 2007, drafting the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council language in the 2015 FAST Act when I was staff director of the Environment and Public Works Committee in the Senate that had jurisdiction over NEPA and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Later, moving on into the administration to be the head of infrastructure of the Council on Environmental Quality, writing one federal decision, which now is elements of that are now in Senator Manchin's bill, and then later being the first executive director of the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, which manages currently about $400 billion in predominantly offshore wind projects. It is that nobody really has the right answer on what to do and how to fix permitting. Everyone agrees on the what. We need more predictability, more accountability. We need more symmetry and streamlining across multiple federal agencies. But when you look behind me over here, the amount of decision makers on one solar facility right here is there's 52 gatekeepers, 52 decision makers. And they are not just in DC, they are spread around the field. Many of the panelists, and we'll get into this in a second, which is the trick to fixing permitting is aligning everyone's definition of success. And the recognition that 20 to 30% of the cost of projects, looking at the largest renewable energy projects that have actually broken ground over the last 10 years, that 20-30% of those overhead costs are absorbed just due to unavoidable obstacles, stops, pauses, and in some cases litigation, recognizing that there's about 85 current solar, wind, energy storage, pump storage, and hydro projects that are in active litigation as we seek because of the ambiguity of our inability to provide a clear pathway of rules of the road. Those costs for additional permitting delays are sometimes borne by the private entity, but at the end of the day, it's us who pay it. It's the ratepayers. It's the users. Those are built into overhead. So although permitting may be a boring issue, it's extremely essential that we fix it because at the end of the day, as I pointed out, this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It is important that we inject responsibility and accountability and transparency so we can adequately diagnose the problem. And for fear of getting in trouble, my association and my members, politicians are not going to solve this problem. The nerds are us on the call. So the question that I'd like to tee up to the group, and not everyone needs to respond, but from your experience, in as lay terms as you possibly can, you can talk about the institutional capacities at agencies that we've dropped about a 900% increase on the Army Corps of Engineers, the Fish and Wildlife, BOEM at Department of Interior to push these projects through the system. We can talk about the culture and behavior and the actual people that have to make these decisions and whether or not we have the best and the brightest that are actually joining the ranks to replace the older generation of regulators, which I would contend we are not. We just can't throw money at the problem. We have real existential issues that have nothing to do with politics. And perhaps I tee that up to the group. In your experience, what do you think are the holdups and the greatest opportunities to address change? Because the truth is, it may not be Capitol Hill that fixes the problem. It could be regulations, it could be at the state and local level, and it could be otherwise guidance that changes the game. We don't need to rely on Congress in many ways to fix the problems. However, many of those are absolutely necessary in order for us to move forward. Why don't we kick it off, Gene? Go ahead, or whoever wants to tee up, go first.
Yeah, Alex, I was just going to say this is something that we're facing on a daily basis, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there are best and brightest that are leaving some of these organizations, and do we have the right incentives in place to keep these folks properly staffed and resourced? And I'll say from a developer's perspective, we're more than happy to pay greater permitting fees, interconnection fees, so long as we see, commensurate effort and resourcing at the various agencies. And just recently, we've been experiencing significant delays in the PJM RTO, where many of those delays have been caused by an outward migration of their subject matter experts to industry participants like us because we are providing greater benefits. And those agencies need to be empowered to create the proper incentives and stickiness so that they do have the best and brightest. And so they are properly resourced and are willing to really lean into the studying of our projects and getting our projects expedited, and having the appropriate carrot and stick mechanisms if they meet the objectives or if they're consistently delinquent. Anyway, I just figured I'd jump in there because it's top of mind for me as we're facing these issues real time.
Yeah, Serge, Gene, those that are working with project developers on a daily basis, perhaps you could provide some insight before we tee up another question that I think you'll enjoy.
Sure, I can jump
Alex,
in. We'll go with Serge.
I'll be short. Just recently in the summer, I was looking at the spot market prices in Massachusetts and Boston, and they were hitting about $300 a megawatt hour in the morning. So we have this contract that's signed with New England, with Massachusetts, for roughly $50 a megawatt hour. So at the end, all these issues we're facing, they impact consumers. They impact the ratepayers. And in New England, they're paying the highest rates in the whole country right now. So there's a problem. Something's broken. We have solutions. We have this excess power in Quebec. We'd like to bring it over there, but we can't because, since 2017, we've been stuck in this process. Permitting process is one, but also the fact that the permitting process opens up so many doors for challenges afterwards. 32 regulatory or legal challenges to this project in New England in 4 years, alone the last 4 years. 2 referendums. And you know what? We've won all of them. So the point is, if you keep winning decisions, you're not making progress. You're stuck in court paying lawyers and you're not doing anything. And in the meanwhile, the consumers are paying record high prices. So I haven't heard this in our conversation, but I think, for sure we can streamline the regulatory process and close some of these doors that we open. But it also takes leadership of all sorts, and I mean political, I mean environmental groups, I mean all sorts of groups, to understand that infrastructure is needed, it's not invisible, and there is no perfect solution. But if we keep waiting, as we're doing right now, and keep pushing things back, the consumer is the one suffering, and we're killing the jobs that we should be encouraging, the jobs that be created by building this infrastructure. Just that main project alone, the one for New England, we had to lay off our partner and ourselves close to 1,000 workers because legal tactics by different groups that are ideologically opposed, or literally by competitors that are using the system to take advantage of all those loopholes, all those doors. And so it's not just radical opposition, as I've heard earlier in the conversation. It's also a small group of very unethical competitors that are using the system to their advantage. So I'll stop at that, but I just wanted to bring that on the radar here.
This is Gene. Just to jump on the costs, I think with respect to transmission, I think studies have shown that transmission, if you build it, it actually pays for itself because ultimately consumers get reduced costs. So, and obviously you have reliability benefits, you get a cleaner grid. So there's a ton of benefits for actually doing this infrastructure that certainly outweigh any costs. One thing, just with respect to resources, I think resources definitely are important, but you can only throw so many resources, and I think you'll still have the problem. So it is definitely key, and the Inflation Reduction Act did provide some funds to permitting agencies to help move the permits forward. So that definitely is an important thing, but I think permitting reform still needs to be part of the equation. And I think one thing when we're talking about permitting reform, it doesn't need to be necessarily, you don't have to change the substance of these bedrock environmental laws. It's really about just expediting the process and trying to really rationalize them so they actually move quicker. And I think examples are setting milestones. We've seen if agencies have milestones for doing environmental reviews, they've actually worked and they've really cut the process sometimes by 50%. So I think it's those type of things that are really ultimately expediting, say, environmental reviews, but still ensuring at the end of the day, there's a robust environmental review. So not really lowering the bar of where you get at the end, but just getting you to that decision point sooner is really kind of key to unlocking at least clean energy.
Well, with that, it kind of brings me to my next question, which is this. Oh,
Alex,
go ahead, Jordan.
It's all right.
All right, go ahead.
I got like 2 sentences. I'll be super fast. I can't echo enough what this group says. What this group said about all of that. The only thing I'll flag kind of from our perspective is, freight transportation demand is expected to grow by 50% by 2050 in this country. And, in order to do that, we have to be able to maintain and grow our infrastructure. I can't emphasize enough just how much these delays in permitting cost the industry billions of dollars that could otherwise be invested into further improving our service and continuing to provide the freight train service that we do to the rest of the economy. That was just my quick 2 sentences.
Sure,
there.
And Gene, Gene makes some good points. I bring the attention to a report last year that also had the Princeton and the Columbia study about transmission dealing with the Federal Power Act, but and it was at the Department of Energy with Secretary Granholm, and there was discussion of 22 shovel-ready transmission projects that are ready to go that can immediately contribute to the grid. The problem, however, is that 21 of those projects, and many of those you'll know, Gene, Cardinal Hickory Creek, 10 West, Gateway, and others, Transwest, and others are in year 9, 10, 11 on their permitting process. Even Gateway, which Bureau of Land Management made a press release about the record of decision, is still 2 years away from their authorization to construct, their notice to proceed. And so it's not necessarily the cost of transmission when it's in operation. It is the insanguination of the investor class that are moving forward to actually try and put the project forward that are ending up in delays with no solution in sight. Many of those are out there so long that the laws change and the judicial precedent changes and the regulations change. And in many cases, it's dealing with private property owners and NIMBYist issues, as Serge pointed out. And I think the bottom line, which folks can talk about, is that, sorry about the dogs there, is the canard that for some reason faster means less protections for the environment has made it into the mainstream. And that's just simply not the case. The reality is that the previous sources of energy, where there was lobbies that were we have an opportunity here, significantly isolated to just protecting coal, traditional sources. The companies that are now building fossil fuel energy are truly all over the board. They're building energy storage, they're doing wind, they're doing solar, they're doing PV, EV charging, while also having a base load of traditional fossil fuel, predominantly dual file natural gas, because we need to have this bridge energy to get to the renewable energy that is right on the horizon if we can just get there. It is no longer the politics of conventional versus renewable. The definitions of success are getting closer and closer together. And perhaps without that distraction, we can focus entirely on the process. And to Gene's point, and this is the question, the next one to the panel to get into a bit of specifics is, yes, milestones help and accountability and transparency help. But every single one of the offshore wind projects that's currently on the Federal Permit Improvement Steering dashboard is experiencing anywhere between 100 and 150% delays in their originally permitting timetable. And the solar and wind that John can speak to out west, there's 22 solar facilities that are currently under litigation sued by the Audubon Foundation, about 12 other pump storage and other hydro facilities that are being sued by the Centers for Biological Diversity, all because sometimes developers move too quickly in the process without adequately addressing stakeholders, and therefore the only backstop oftentimes become, in order to exact mitigation to protect species or the environment, is to go to court. And largely that is because it is an applicant-driven process. You drop these very complicated documents off at the federal, for these federal folks that on average are anywhere between 30 to 35 years old and have a biology or a science-based degree and are not experts in project management now that we have $3 billion projects, where previously it was something far smaller. So the folks that are actually have to give that okay, that have this giant decision on their desk that are at a field office in Nevada, now have to make a risk-based decision on how to protect and balance the natural environment with human activity in approving projects. And that's a difficult thing, and it requires training and more than just changing laws. So for you all, recognize the institutional capacity at the local level and the state level, because we need better counterparties within the federal agencies that can approve and validate these 2,000-page applications that are very technical in nature. That's one idea, right? We need to focus on the recruiting and training, not just throwing money at it. But to the panel, what specific ideas outside of these larger transparency ideas that are in the Manchin bill, which largely track with one federal decision in the Federal Permitting Council, outside of some discussions of Mountain Valley Pipeline and the regulation of hydrogen and the transmission section that Gene mentioned, which is only a 90-page bill. You really need a 2,000-page bill to address all the issues that affect permitting, because it's such a massive undertaking that spreads across so many agencies and so many jurisdictions across states. But what are some ideas that you think maybe even specific regulations or others that would provide some immediate obstacle reduction for those putting capital at risk to take us to the next generation energy production that is predominantly renewable based and helping climate emissions. Let's just go down the line. Gene, you always end up going last. Gene, we have 15 minutes left, by the way, and then we want to take a question. So let's try and keep answers to 2 minutes, and I'll even abide by my own instructions. Gene?
Sure. And this is just in the way of an example of a potential reform to permitting, and there's tons that could be considered, but something that's not in the mentioned Schumer permitting bill. You mentioned offshore wind. Offshore wind has been held up often. So you typically have the lead agency, the Bureau of Energy Management, that's going to give you your permit for constructing that offshore wind facility, but then you have NOAA as a coordinating agency looking at kind of environmental impacts to marine mammals and so forth. But often NOAA or other agencies will essentially float alternatives that are considered in the environmental review. So when you're doing an environmental review, the agency, to make sure it's an informed decision, has to consider alternatives to the project. And it makes sense to consider those alternatives, but it doesn't make sense to consider kind of non-viable, essentially non-technologically or economically feasible alternatives. And I think we've seen that happen over and over again with not just offshore projects, but onshore wind, solar, and transmission, where agencies are spending their time and stakeholders are submitting comments on alternatives that just would never pan out. And then if the developer isn't ultimately going to do a project and it doesn't help meet the goals of the agency or the developer, it probably doesn't make sense to waste. Again, there's limited resources at agencies to consider these projects. And also, stakeholder time should really be spent focusing on what is likely to move forward. So to give an example, is often you'll have NOAA float over to the Bureau of Energy Management an alternative that has a wind turbine blades being put on an offshore wind facility, and the blades don't even exist. They're not technologically or economically feasible. So I think it's things like that. And this is just a small part of the pie, but it's just a representative example that, and if these alternatives that are not technologically or economically feasible ultimately become the preferred alternative of an agency, that means the project's just never going to go forward. Because you can't even develop that project. So everyone's time and resources has essentially been wasted. So there's a lot of ways to kind of make the process more efficient. Again, that's just an example of one. The Bureau of Energy Management recently put in kind of a screening tool to make sure that it only considered reasonable alternatives. So there are fixes to it. And I think it's, again, there's multiple things that need to be done. And that's just one example of them. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Sure. John, and then let's John, and then Serge, if we can. If you don't have anything, that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you. I really come back to the carrot and stick mechanism. I mean, if you read the Manchin bill, if you look at the interconnection NOPR that FERC is undertaking right now, it has, best efforts, we'll set a schedule and we'll do our best to achieve the schedules. And I think, without firm incentives, both, again, carrot and stick, while being reasonable, just like a construction project you may have at your home when you sign up with a contractor, if you don't have any stipulation in terms of, what happens if the project is delayed, oftentimes what you'll see is excuses will arise and the project will be delayed. So we have to address that issue. But Serge brought up something that we also have to address, and that is this ongoing litigation risk that you could be dotting every I, crossing every T, and the system is constructed in such a way where your opponents, and there could be a myriad of them, have the ability to just drag you out. They know they're not going to win on the merits, but they can just drag you out. And we have to have a review process that as soon as that sort of call it litigation arises, that it's expedited and it doesn't take years in the courts. So those two issues in my mind are paramount. And until we solve those issues, you're going to have excuses as to why things took too long. And the developers also have to play their part as well. They have to provide information in a timely manner, or there'd be consequences as well. So with that, I'll cede the rest of my time.
Serge?
I'll just add, completely agree with John. Protect permits. I mean, you can go through the 4, 5, whatever it takes year process, and then you're facing never-ending challenges. And you know, imagine when you go back to your board and you say, "Oh, I've got another transmission project in this state or that state." The confidence that they have in saying, "Yes, go ahead again," it's not there, and it's getting worse and worse. So we need to address that. You take Maine as an example. There's a referendum process. As a developer, people will ask, "What have you done to get Maine on board?" Okay, well, we bring clean, reliable energy to the region at an affordable price. There's actually a part of that energy that's at a discounted price for Maine. There's a $300 million compensation package for Maine, which is bigger than what's been offered to New York, which is actually a successful project. So you think of all of that for rate relief and heat pumps and energy efficiencies and all these things that Mainers will benefit from. But yet you're stuck in that process. So Mainers don't benefit, the rates stay high. There's reliability issues in the region. They keep worrying about the winter. And you're certainly not transitioning to cleaner fuels. So protecting permits and putting a time limit to how long people can challenge these things for is essential. Because if it goes on forever, there's no next time. We don't go back to our board and say, "Hey guys, let's go back to Maine again." It doesn't happen.
I think it might be helpful for those, because I'm seeing some of the questions, is the process of permitting. Yep.
Oh, you mind if I jump in as well? I think I
sure, Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say two quick things for the rail industry in terms of changes that could be really beneficial to us. The first is extending the application of one federal decision to all NEPA reviews undertaken by federal agencies. NEPA is generally triggered out of resource agency permitting. So with us, a lot of times that ends up being the Army Corps or the Coast Guard. As a result, DOT or STB is not, or sorry, not to throw like a million acronyms there. It's Surface Transportation Board is not they're not the lead federal agency for rail projects subject to NEPA review. And the second one that we have that I think is probably a little to the rest of the panelists is that the rail industry is also a large portion of our infrastructure has been designated as historic, especially in major rail yards. And Congress actually recognized this, and Alex, this may very well have been you, in the FAST Act, and provided a provision that required that rail projects be treated by the Advisory for Historic Preservation as similar to or consistent with federal highway projects. And however, we feel ACHP has not complied with this requirement at this point and has instead created something that's extremely burdensome for railroads to pre-clear, hundreds of thousands of miles right away for us to ever benefit from the provision that was in the Act. Those are our two big changes that I think would be really beneficial for us.
I'm going to say one thing that's important to recognize that it might help some of the comments, but at the beginning of a project, you have your engineers, your business development folks that are actually looking at the economic viability of the project and transmission or offshore wind, who are going to be the off-takers, who's going to buy our electricity from a generation standpoint, how are we going to get it there? And then you have your environmental permitting folks and your attorneys. All three of those might be in different offices, but that's about 80 people that you've already got putting an application together, because the application is written and paid for by the applicant, given to the Army Corps of Engineers, given to the BOEM, and submitted. They deem it correct. It's an applicant-driven process. In these applications and these projects, it's important to recognize that The legal durability that was mentioned is because that administrative record that is created over those 5 to 7 years, as multiple different agencies opine and biological opinions and different comments, that's the record that is challenged. And the durability of that record and the lightning and litigation footholds is because up until now, we have not put together legally durable administrative records that are not addressing all issues. Because a project sponsor that is sending an application in for approval out of a federal agency must get everything right. Those that are opposed to the project only need to point out one issue that may have been omitted. Maybe it was the Army Corps of Engineers didn't talk to the National Marine Fisheries Service, that didn't take into account a consultation on a particular species or wildlife. That one issue may not necessarily be the fault of the developer. It may be the fact that the confluence of those that gatekeepers, those subject matter experts within the agencies missed something, which is entirely normal. We have to recognize and have backstops that we have to take away this adversarial nature between developers and those that will benefit and bridge the distrust that exists. The other thing that I'll say is confession is good for the soul. I wrote one federal decision while I was in the Trump administration, and I will tell you it is not working. Codified as it's not working, it's quite interesting because there are too many loopholes that allow for the dependencies across these 13 federal agencies. In this communication realm right here, where there are communication breakdowns. And even though deadlines are nice, deadlines don't work if there's extensive pauses because they're exhaustive requests for information back to the applicant. So what I would say is that the illusion of progress and the illusion of success in permitting, it is often case not where we need to begin. It just becomes the more political, easy thing to talk about and the thing that we can put in a mansion bill, which is 80% of it, without actually digging deep and figuring out how to fix the statutes and the regs that are overlapping and conflict in many ways. The other thing I'll point out is from the level of politics, every single member of the Senate, the Democratic Senate, Bernie Sanders, those that are opposing the current mansion package, voted for the codification of one federal decision in the infrastructure bill last year, which is triggered the largest single expansion of mobile source emissions in the expansion of roads and bridges in the history of our country, which far outpaces the emissions that would come from a Mountain Valley pipeline, for instance. But we never talk about that. We never talk about the politics of facts that it is the politics of now that matter, not what happened last year that might make some of these decisions politically inconsistent with where you've been before. But the reality is one federal decision has already been voted on by a predominant member of the Democrats in the House and the Senate, and now it is being opposed in this bill along with some of the other provisions. So when I say politicians don't solve the problem, both sides have gotten it wrong. And at the end of the day, it's these kinds of meetings that where we can actually talk about the real issues before we just throw barbs back and forth as if speeding up a project means that we are reducing stakeholder engagement and disenfranchising the very communities that benefit. It's just the system is not built to allow for that kind of inoculation of full community impact with tribal, local, disadvantaged communities and so forth. And therefore, there's a tremendous amount of distrust. Bridging that distrust is the first step. Because at the end of the day, it's the culture and behavior, because these are people making these decisions, not robots. Final 1 minute comment. We got 3 minutes left. Let's start with Jordan, because I always go last, and then let's just swing it around real quick. 30 seconds left.
Nothing more here from me. Yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for coming out and appreciate for moderating and hearing the railroad's concerns. Thank you very much.
Gene, John, Serge?
I would just say that recognizing the problem is the first step, and this is what we're doing. Working together for the solutions is the next, is what's next. So I appreciate the conversation. This is very productive.
It's the how. We got the what, but we got to get to the how. And we got to help our informed public leaders understand what the solutions are, rather than vacillating to year-old talking points.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that the passage of the IRA and the objectives contained in that legislation are tremendous. But as I said at the outset, unless we make meaningful strides to streamline the permitting and interconnection processes and the transmission build out, it truly is just hopes and dreams. And we're going to have to, as a nation, make some tough trade-offs. But the consequences of not making some of those trade-offs to expedite the timelines is tremendous. So,
yep, there's the disconnect between the fact that all of Gene's members chose not to build another project. If Serge didn't, or if John didn't, we wouldn't have any electricity. It comes from, although it's government supported, it comes from folks like Gene and his members. Gene, you send us off.
Oh, I was just about to say, yeah, I think it's just the beginning of the conversation. If we're serious about kind of meeting climate goals and, clean energy transition, we're going to have to, crack this nut. And so I think the Manchin-Schumer bill, regardless of whether it ultimately passes or not, has done us a favor of at least, help facilitating this conversation, and more to come.
Agreed. Well, hey, thank you for all your panelists. For those that asked questions, we can respond to those. I'll be able to respond to those in email, perhaps. Have a good one. Thank you for participating on Clean Energy Symposium on Permitting.
thank you.